So I mentioned that the real goal of our time together is actually to pray. So let me try to explain to you how we'll most powerfully do that. This is where it happens. So I was thinking earlier, I think Mary might have been with me on that retreat. So 22 years ago, I led a RCIA retreat in Ohio. So I'd been ordained just about a year. And we took a group about this same size. We went down to Ohio. Why? I don't know, Michelle. It was the only place available. So we go down there, and we had just an extraordinary time. And the experience on that one retreat has shaped for me forever how I lead retreats, which is to say that the real work of the retreat happens between you and me and God alone in private in here, where God shows up in extraordinary ways. So the retreat was just like this, a combination of people who are already Catholic and people who aren't baptized and people who were baptized but not Catholic yet. And I think we probably had like 2/3 to 1/3 people who couldn't receive the Eucharist yet. But the highlight of the retreat was Mass and adoration. So some of you are familiar with Eucharistic adoration because you see it down in the chapel as you enter into the church on that west side. But how many have never seen that? How many have never seen our chapel where the Eucharist is exposed? How many have never seen the Eucharist exposed or even have a clue what I'm talking about? Okay, so I'm going to share this. So this thing here, this is called a monstrance, which just comes from a word in Latin which means to show. So in here, there's nothing in there right now, but in here, after Mass ends, I'm going to put a consecrated host, the Eucharist. And I place it in here, and then we put this on the altar. And so when we were on retreat, we had one of these with us, and the highlight that everybody expressed was two things: the opportunity just to be silent and to pray in front of the Eucharist, in front of the Lord, who hides himself under the appearance of bread. And then the way that we were able to celebrate Mass, which you can do in a setting like this, which is not like, a Sunday at 10 where you've got to get your car out of the parking lot and get ready for the next car to come in. So Mass, or the retreat ended. I remember sitting in a room, we were all there, and we were talking about going home and sharing the graces that God had given us on our time away. Put that down there. And then what we could do to try to hold on to the experience of being away and what God had done. And so we determined that what we would do, some of you have heard this story before, I know. I went home, I asked the pastor of the parish where I was serving, I said, can I have your permission? We'll just do like an evening Mass in the middle of the week on a Wednesday night. We'll turn all the lights down, we'll have great music, and we'll just leisurely celebrate Mass. And he said, sure. So we did that. We did it for 2-3 months maybe. And we would always pray with people afterwards. So we're going to have a chance to do some of these kinds of things tomorrow night too. But we would, myself, a couple other people, we would pray with folks after Mass. And we had, 200-300 people show up for Mass. And it seems like half of them wanted to get prayed with, which meant you're praying with people until about midnight, which was probably pretty exhausting to wait in line. And it got to be really tiresome for us who were praying with people. And so I remember praying myself before Mass one morning. I was reading a little reflection as I was praying, and the reflection was from this Irish nun. And she was just talking about being, I think she was in New Zealand giving a talk. She was very anxious about the talk. She woke up in the middle of the night, she started to pray, and she felt like the Lord just said to her name was Briege, great Irish name. And the Lord said, Briege, there's too much Briege. They don't need Briege. They need me. And so she understood what that meant, and as I was reading it, I felt like the Lord was trying to talk to me too. And so the next Wednesday came, and I explained to everybody, so we're going to do something a little different tonight. What I'm going to do instead of, after Mass, us praying with people, I'm just going to expose the Eucharist on the altar. So we're going to have a monstrance, put it in the altar, and I'm going to put 2 kneelers, so like what Steve has in front of him here, I'm going to put 2 kneelers up here in the sanctuary. And if you feel led, you want to come closer to the Lord in the Eucharist, you want to pray in front of him, one of the kneelers, great. If you want to just sit in the pews, great. We'll take like 30 minutes. Why waste time asking me to pray for you when you could just ask Jesus directly, right? So, great. So Mass ends, and so the church seats about like 1,500 people, about the size of ours, but it's laid out totally different. So by now you might have noticed, like, my head's almost always down. So Mass ends, and the church is laid out somewhat like this in the sense of altar, tabernacle, all the people out there. So I get the Eucharist out of the tabernacle, I put it in the monstrance, I put it here, and my head's down, and I could just hear a lot of commotion, which I figure is just, it's a cold night, people got their coats on, they're just leaving. I go over to here, so we had a kneeler almost exactly like this is, and I look, and there's like 40 people in the sanctuary. It's 2 kneelers. And the noise was all the people like rushed the altar. Like, that's how I describe it. So you hear in the gospel, like, it always says that, and the crowds were pressing in on Jesus to touch him, right? To get as close to him as they could. And so I'm kneeling here, looking at the Lord in the monstrance, and then looking at all these people. I'm a year ordained. And I didn't grow up with any of this. Joe and I were talking about this earlier. Like, where was this when I was a teenager? I never saw this. Just never happened. I had no devotion, no experience of praying like this in my life. So I'm bewildered at this, quite honestly. And as I'm watching this, I'll just tell you, like, this is the only way how to explain it. I just see Jesus standing on the altar. So I'm not seeing that anymore. I see him in his body standing on the altar. And at a certain point, he turned towards me. So now Steve's me, and the Lord just turned towards me. And he did this. And he said, "Don't you see how easy this is? You don't have to do anything. You just have to put me out, and I'll work." And ever since that night, doing this, carving out time to have the Eucharist exposed, building chapels like we have at Good Counsel, has been one of the first things I've ever done wherever I've gone as a priest. Because my words don't change people's lives. He changes people's lives. And in this chapel, I can't tell you how many people's lives have been changed just on our retreats. People just like you who perhaps have never done this, who stayed up for an hour in the middle of the night or got up in the middle of the night. I'll explain how we do that in a second. Came down here and just more or less said something like this: "All right, show yourself." We had a Muslim guy with us on retreat 4 years ago. Remember that? So, doesn't believe in Jesus, right? Thinks he's a false prophet. He got up early Saturday morning, late Friday night, came into the chapel, sat down, looked at the Eucharist, and said something like that: "Okay, Lord, if this is true, show yourself." And did he ever? And he got baptized just a couple weeks later. Every single time we do this, God shows up because he's here and he reveals himself. All we have to do is give him time. So Joe taped on this door here. This is just a sign-up sheet. So it's from tonight, starting at about 10 till 7 in the morning. And so what we invite people to do is either when we're done with Mass and before we go to bed, just put your name down, stay for an hour, or get up in the middle of the night fill one of the hours. So every time the Eucharist is exposed, somebody needs to be here, because you never leave the Lord unattended. He can take care of himself, but you just don't ever, he's the all-powerful king of the universe, but you just don't leave him unattended. So we just ask people to sign up. So especially if you've never done this, I'd strongly encourage you, sign up. I know we're all dead tired, right? So that's fine. But you can't outdo God in generosity. If you make a point to say, I'm going to get up at 3, and you come down here and you spend an hour in front of him, and you just talk to him and listen to him. Whether it's, Lord, I'm the kid in the field who's afraid of coming home, or I'm the one who's here tonight and I just don't know if any of this is true, or I'm a couple weeks from getting baptized and I still don't know what's going on, or wherever we might be. Just come and have it out with him and ask him to show himself, because I am so convinced he wants to do that this weekend. Okay? Does that make sense? So this is the agenda. I shared with Joe some pictures from a retreat we did 5 years ago, maybe 6, which I'll show you in the morning. I won't show you tonight, of what happened when somebody did this, which will just astound you, quite honestly, when you see what happened. But God is here, and he loves to be in your company, and he wants to say something to you. So we'll do it again tomorrow night too. We're going to do it throughout the day tomorrow. This is the real point of, this is why retreats are so extraordinary. Our time together is awesome. The food's okay. The beds are horrible. So you might as well stay up anyway, because you're not going to sleep. But the highlight of the retreat, the reason why people rave about retreats, is because they meet God. And God's met here. So do your best to take advantage of it.